Hello students, I welcome you all to today's lesson about plant tissues. ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਾਣਦੇ ਹੀ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਸਾਰੇ plants ਅਤੇ animals ਦੀ body ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਛੋਟੇ-ਛੋਟੇ microscopic structures ਦੀ ਬਣੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਇਨ੍ਹਾਂ microscopic structures ਨੂੰ cells ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। Plants ਅਤੇ animals ਦੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ activities ਜਿਵੇਂ movement, growth, irritability ਆਦि ਇਨ੍ਹਾਂ cells ਦੇ ਕਾਰਨ ਹੀ ਸੰਭਵ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਹਨ। Cells are the fundamental units of life. Cells having a common origin and performing similar function form tissues. As plants are generally sedentary and a major part of the plant is formed by dead cells, their tissues are arranged into simple tissue systems. Whereas in animals, different tissues together constitute organs, which in turn constitute organ systems. In other words, the structural organization of animals is more complex as compared to plants. However, like all multicellular organisms, plants too require tissues for transport of water and nutrients from one part of the plant to another. Plants also require tissues for storage of pigments and products formed during photosynthesis. Basically, tissue is a collection of cells of common origin and structure working together to provide specific function. Hence, tissue may be defined as an aggregation of similar or dissimilar cells having a common origin and usually performing a common function. In animals, organs are formed by the functional grouping of multiple tissues. The study of tissues is known as histology. So, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ organism ਦੀ formation ਵਿੱਚ tissues ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ important role ਹੈ। ਇਹ tissues plants ਦੇ ਅਲੱਗ-ਅਲੱਗ parts ਅਤੇ specific regions ਤੇ located ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਨ, ਜੋ ਉਸ ਭਾਗ ਦੇ function ਵਿੱਚ ਸਹਾਈ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਨ। If we talk about plant tissues, they are broadly classified as meristematic and permanent tissues. Cells that divide actively are known as meristematic tissues, and those cells that get differentiated and lose their ability to divide are known as permanent tissues. Depending on their location in the plant body, meristematic tissues may be apical, intercalary, and lateral. The permanent tissues may be simple and complex. Simple permanent tissues consist of a single type of cells, whereas complex permanent tissues consist of more than one type of cells. Parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma are type of simple permanent tissues. Xylem and phloem are complex permanent tissues. Plant tissues are characterized and classified according to their structure and function. On the basis of their structure and location, there are three types of tissue systems. These are the epidermal tissue system, the ground or fundamental tissue system, and the vascular or conducting tissue system. The epidermal tissue covers the outer surface of herbaceous plants. The ground tissue forms the bulk or the primary plant body. Vascular tissue transports food, water, hormones, and minerals within the plant body. The study of tissues is very important and useful, as the type and organization of these tissues provide an insight into speciation and phylogeny of plant groups. In this topic, we will look at the various types of plant tissues with respect to their location and function in the plant body. It is important to realize that in some plants, there may be slight variation and modification in the basic tissue types. The plant body is basically made up of different kinds of tissues. Let us study these different types of tissues.
Plant tissues. The plant tissues are primarily classified into two types: meristematic tissue, permanent tissue. Meristematic tissue is composed of similar immature cells which can divide to form new cells. The cells of the permanent tissues generally do not divide. Permanent tissues having all cells similar in structure and function are called simple permanent tissues. Permanent tissues having different types of cells are called complex permanent tissues. Simple permanent tissues are further subdivided into three types: parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Sclerenchyma tissue is further subdivided into two types: fibers and scleretes. A complex permanent tissue may be classified as a group of more than one type of tissues having a common origin and working together as a unit to perform a function. Complex tissues are of two types: xylem and phloem.
ਇਹ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਕਿਸਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਲਾਂਟ ਟਿਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਹਨ, ਪਰ ਸਾਡਾ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਫੋਕਸ ਸਿਰਫ ਮੈਰਿਸਟੇਮੈਟਿਕ ਟਿਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਤੇ ਹੀ ਰਹੇਗਾ. Let us study the meristematic tissues in detail. The word meristem is derived from the Greek term meristos, which means to divide. So, these are the unspecialized cells that divide and generate new cells and tissues. Meristematic tissues are made up of cells or group of cells that have the ability to divide. These tissues in a plant consist of small, densely packed cells that keep on dividing to form new cells. So, the meristematic tissues are responsible for the division of new cells, and they are the zones of actively dividing cells. Students, the cell division occurs solely in meristematic regions, while expansion may occur anywhere. Thus, in a single plant, there are zones of young dividing cells, maturing cells, and mature cells. Meristematic tissues, or simply meristems, are tissues in which the cells divide actively throughout the life of the plant. When a meristematic cell divides in two, the new cell that remains in the meristem is called an initial, and the other is called the derivative. As new cells are added by repeated mitotic divisions of the initial cells, the derivatives are pushed farther away from the zone of active division. They stretch, enlarge, and differentiate into other types of tissues as they mature. Let us now discuss these tissues in detail.
Meristematic tissue. Tissue where the cells are constantly dividing is called meristematic tissue. A localized meristematic tissue is called meristem. Cells of meristematic tissues possess power of division and hence produce new cells. The new cells are generally small, six-sided box-like structures as shown here. You can also see here that these cells are closely packed and are without any intercellular spaces. Their cell wall is thin and made up of cellulose. These cells have a large nucleus with distinct nucleolus. The cytoplasm is dense and cells lack vacuoles and chloroplasts. Plants grow in length by apical meristems at the tips of shoots. Increase in length is also due to intercalary meristems. These occur between mature tissues of the plant. In the stem, it is found close to internodes. Intercalary meristem is important for the final shape and size of the plant. As new cells form in the meristems, the roots and shoots will increase in length. Both apical meristems and intercalary meristems are primary meristems because they appear early in the life of a plant and contribute to the formation of primary plant body. Characteristics of typical meristematic tissues can be summarized as: cells of meristematic tissues are small, rounded, oval, polygonal, or rectangular in shape. The cells have a thin cell wall which is composed of cellulose. Every cell has a single conspicuous nucleus which is situated in the center of the cell. Vacuoles are absent or are very small. There are no intercellular spaces. Cells divide in a particular plane.
Students, the meristematic tissues can be found in growing tips of roots and shoots. They can be found in the vascular cambium of dicot trees just beneath the bark. Meristematic tissues ਦਾ ਮੇਨ ਫੰਕਸ਼ਨ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਨਵੇਂ ਸੈੱਲ ਬਣਾਉਣਾ ਅਤੇ ਪਲਾਂਟ ਦੀ ਗਰੋਥ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਲਪ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਟਿਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਟਾਈਪ ਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਨ ਅਤੇ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਲਾਸੀਫਾਈ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਨ। They can be classified on the basis of their position, on the basis of their different functions, and on the basis of origin and method of development. Let us study the different classifications of meristematic tissues.
Classification of meristematic tissues on the basis of their position. Depending on the region where they are present, meristematic tissues can be classified as apical meristem, intercalary meristem, secondary or lateral meristem. The meristems which occur at the tips of roots and shoots and produce primary tissues are called apical meristems. Root apical meristem occupies the tip of a root, while the shoot apical meristem occupies the distant most region of the stem axis. During the formation of leaves and elongation of stem, some cells left behind from shoot apical meristem constitute the axillary bud. Such buds are present in the axis of leaves and are capable of forming a branch or a flower. Intercalary meristems are located between the permanent tissues, that is, the meristem located at internodes, the base of node, petiole, pedicel, etc. They occur in grasses and regenerated parts, removed by the grazing herbivores. As already discussed, both apical meristems and intercalary meristems are primary meristems because they appear early in the life of a plant and contribute to the formation of the primary plant body. Secondary or lateral meristems are located lateral to the longitudinal axis of plant organs such as cambium, etc. Lateral meristem is responsible for horizontal expansion or account for secondary growth in plants. It helps to increase in the diameter of the stem. A good example would be the increase in girth of a tree trunk.
Meristematic tissues can also be classified on the basis of their different functions. On the basis of the functions, meristematic tissues can be classified into protoderm, procambium, ground meristem. Protoderm is the meristem which gives rise to the epidermis of stem and epiblemma of root. It is also called as dermatogen. Procambium is the meristem which gives rise to the primary vascular tissue. Ground meristem is the meristem which gives rise to the ground tissue such as cortex, pericycle and pith. Based on origin and method of development, meristematic tissues can be classified into the three types. These are promeristem or primordial meristem, primary meristem and secondary meristem. Let us discuss these types one by one.
Promeristem or primordial meristem. It is also called embryonic meristem as it originates from embryo. It occurs at the tip of stem and root. It gives rise to primary meristem by cell division. The next type of tissue is primary meristem. It is the meristem that is present right from the embryonic stage and continues to be active throughout the life of a plant. It is concerned with the formation of primary permanent tissues of the primary plant body. A primary meristem produces primary growth at the apical shoot and root tip. That is, it is responsible for primary growth or lengthening of root in the plant body. Three primary meristems such as protoderm, procambium and ground meristem function to form primary tissues and help in elongation of shoots and roots. Example of this type is the meristem found at the tip of the stem and root. The third type of meristematic tissue is the secondary meristem. It is the meristem that appears later in the life of a plant. It develops by a process called de-differentiation in the permanent tissues. The secondary meristem is involved in the thickening of the plant. There are two kinds of secondary meristem: cork cambium, vascular cambium. Cork cambium cells are responsible for the formation of the bark, vascular cambium cells form secondary xylem and phloem.
So, these were the types of meristematic tissues based on origin and method of development. So, we can say that the primary meristem gives rise to the primary permanent tissues of the plant body, whereas secondary meristem gives rise to the secondary permanent tissues such as secondary cortex and secondary xylem, and hence responsible for secondary growth in the plant body. ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰਾਇਮਰੀ ਮੈਰਿਸਟਮ ਅਤੇ ਸੈਕੰਡਰੀ ਮੈਰਿਸਟਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਥੋੜੇ ਜਿਹੇ ਕਨਫਿਊਜ਼ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਹੋ। ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਮਝਣ ਲਈ ਆਓ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਦੋਨੋਂ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੈਰਿਸਟਮੈਟਿਕ ਟਿਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਤੋਂ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅਲੱਗ ਹਨ।
Differences between primary meristem and secondary meristem. Primary meristem arises from promeristem or embryonic meristems, whereas secondary meristem develops by a process called dedifferentiation, as a new meristem is formed from the permanent tissues. Cells found here are generally rounded, oval, polygonal, and have a box-like appearance, whereas cells of secondary meristem are generally elongated. Primary meristem gives rise to the primary permanent tissues of the plant body, but secondary meristem gives rise to secondary permanent tissues such as secondary cortex and secondary xylem. The primary meristem is responsible for the lengthening of plant body, whereas the secondary meristem is involved in the thickening of the plant. Examples of this type of meristem are protoderm, procambium, and ground meristem, whereas cambium of root, interfascicular cambium of stem, cork cambium of both roots, and stem are the examples of secondary meristems.
Students, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਪ੍ਰਾਇਮਰੀ ਮੈਰਿਸਟਮ ਅਤੇ ਸੈਕੰਡਰੀ ਮੈਰਿਸਟਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੰਤਰ ਸਪਸ਼ਟ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਹੋਵੇਗਾ। ਵੈਲ, ਇਹ ਸੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਵਿਸ਼ਾ, that is about meristematic tissues. Let us summarize all that we have learned so far. Tissue is a collection of cells of common origin and structure working together to provide specific function. Hence, tissue may be defined as an aggregation of similar or dissimilar cells having a common origin and usually performing a common function. Plant tissues are primarily classified into two types: meristematic tissue and permanent tissue. The cells of the permanent tissues do not generally divide. Permanent tissues having all cells similar in structure and function are called simple permanent tissues. Permanent tissues having many different types of cells are called complex permanent tissues. Tissues where the cells are constantly dividing are called meristematic tissues. A localized meristematic tissue is called meristem. The cells possess the power of cell division and hence produce new cells. Meristematic tissue is formed by undifferentiated embryonic cells called meristematic cells. Depending on the region where they are present, meristematic tissues can be classified as apical meristem, intercalary meristem, and secondary or lateral meristem. On the basis of the functions, meristematic tissues can be classified into protoderm, procambium, ground meristem. Based on origin and method of development, meristematic tissues can be classified into three types. These are promeristem or primordial meristem, primary meristem, and secondary meristem. The primary meristem is responsible for the lengthening of root and shoot. Example of primary meristem is meristem found at the tip of the stem and root. The secondary meristem is involved in the thickening of the plant. There are two kinds of secondary meristems, cork cambium and vascular cambium. So students, ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਸੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਵਿਸ਼ਾ. Let us quickly check with some short questions what you have grabbed today. Be attentive. Here are some questions. Question: how can we broadly classify plant tissues? Answer: the plant tissues are primarily classified into two types, meristematic tissue and permanent tissue. The next question is, which are the growth tissues of plants? Answer: the growth tissues of the plants are the meristems or meristematic tissues. Next question: how can you classify the meristematic tissues according to their origin and method of development? Answer: based on origin and method of development, meristematic tissues can be classified into three types. These are promeristem or primordial meristem, primary meristem, and secondary meristem. The next question is, how are the meristematic tissues classified according to their position? Answer: on the basis of their position, meristematic tissues can be distinguished into apical meristems, intercalary meristems, and secondary or lateral meristems. My next question is, list 4 main characteristics of meristematic tissues. Answer: characteristics of meristematic tissues are: cells of meristematic tissues are small, rounded, oval, polygonal, or rectangular in shape. The cells have a thin cell wall, which is composed of only cellulose. Every cell has a single prominent nucleus, which is situated in the center of the cell. The chromosomes are always found in some phase of mitotic division. Next question: what are apical meristems? Which type of plant growth does this meristem promote? The answer is, apical meristems are the primary meristems found in the apex of the stem and in the tips of roots. The apical meristems are responsible for the primary growth of the plants. The next question is, what are lateral meristems and which type of plant growth do they promote? The answer is, lateral meristems are located lateral to the longitudinal axis of plant organs, such as cambium, etc. Lateral meristem is responsible for horizontal expansion or account for secondary growth in plants. My next question is, what is the basic difference between primary meristem and secondary meristem? Answer: the primary meristem is responsible for the lengthening of plant body, whereas the secondary meristem is involved in the thickening of the plant. Hope I have made a successful attempt to clear all the concepts regarding meristematic tissues. Understanding of this topic will help you in fetching good marks in the exam. Thanks for your cooperation and attention. Looking forward to the next class. See you then. Thanks.